Hi and welcome to this second video about genetic testing, and today we're going to look at IVF and preimplantation diagnosis. And so IVF stands for in vitro fertilization, so that's fertilization using a sperm and an egg that happens outside of the body, and hence in vitro. In vivo means within the body. Now with IVF what happens is this is basically a procedure used for people who have fertility problems. And so what happens is eggs are stimulated to be released, and they're therefore extracted. You can also therefore get a sample of sperm, and you can then fertilise the egg outside the body, and hence IVF. And from there you can get some viable embryos. And so that gets up to step 4. And so now what we have is we have several embryos that could now possibly be placed back into the mother or placed into a surrogate, and therefore can develop into, from an embryo, can therefore develop into a fetus and therefore develop into a baby. Now in IVF what they will do is they will implant several embryos, because what generally happens is that increases the likelihood of a success. And so in some cases they can implant up to 5 or 6 embryos at a go. It has to be said that IVF isn't always successful, and obviously as the techniques get better and as technology gets better, you'll find that there's a greater success rate. But one of the things that they can do before they implant some of the embryos is they can check those embryos for any genetic defects. Genetic defects like cystic fibrosis, or for any other types of harmful conditions. And obviously the ones that they deem harmful, or the ones that have this genetic defect, are not reimplanted into the uterus. So that's what's known as preimplantation diagnosis. It's where the genes of these embryos before they're implanted are checked, and they're checked to see whether they have certain genetic conditions. Now there are certain conditions which obviously are selected for against, and so you can ensure that the baby will be in good health. But an ethical issue to do with this is whether this gets taken a step further. And so for instance you might select embryos you know to have genes which are linked to longevity, intelligence, maybe even appearance, and for other features like this. Now it seems quite black and white that you wouldn't select for this, but obviously if people had the technology available and therefore they could pick and they were willing to pay, this is a potential possibility. And so this is something that needs to be closely regulated and checked so that it isn't abused, and so that therefore it's used in the correct manner, which is probably useful now. So this test is actually used to determine whether an embryo might suffer from cystic fibrosis, and there's a whole raft of conditions that you can probably find on the net that it's used to test for. And so obviously this needs to be very, very closely monitored and regulated so that it ensures it doesn't promote things like eugenics, where certain characteristics or traits that are not related necessarily to health are therefore picked, because the problems are obvious from that